Why am I always going on about early sex education? Because reasons, which I will get into right now. Hi, I'm Nadine Thornhill, sexuality educator. If you have followed me for any length of time, you know that I am a big advocate for starting sex education early, both in homes and in schools. So today I want to talk a little bit more about why that is. Over the years, I have gotten into a debate or 2 or 10 with folks who are like, why are we talking to little kids about sex? Little kids should not be having sex. And guess what? I agree with you. Of course, little kids should not be having sex. But sex ed is not just about sex. It's about sexuality. Now, what is the difference? When we talk about sex, we're generally talking about things that people do or say or think in order to trigger feelings of sexual arousal or desire or release. I have a whole video on what is sex, and you can watch it. I will put it in the eye. When we talk about sexuality, we're talking about something much broader that encompasses so many aspects of the human experience. We're talking about bodies. What parts of our bodies we consider sexual, what we call them, how we clean them, how we keep them healthy, how we feel about them, how they change throughout our lives. We're talking about pieces of our identity, how we see ourselves, how other people see us, how we want other people to see us, the clothes that we pick, the way that we choose to groom ourselves, how we relate to other people, the expectations that are placed on us by society, and how we feel about those expectations. Sexuality involves relationships, how we experience and express affection, attraction, and love. It's about how we build families. It's about how we connect to other people. Sexuality is also about our emotions, how we feel, how those feelings affect our boundaries, how those feelings affect our desires, how those feelings can change in a moment, in an hour, a day, a year, over the course of our lives, how we express those feelings and use them to communicate with the other people in our lives. And sexuality is also about sex, but it is about so much more. It's basically about how to be a human. And people are humans from jump, from day one. And that's why I believe that early sex education is critical. Now, even though children should not be having sex, they may still have some questions about sex. A lot of little kids want to know where they or other babies have come from. I have a video on that. I'm going to link it for you in the eye. As adults, we can have sex, and if we live with kids, they might walk in on us and want to know what's up. I also have a video about how to address those questions or concerns also in the eye. Now, there are a lot of benefits to early sex education, both for you as a parent or a caregiver, but also for your kids. Starting early gives both you and your kid a lot of time. That means you can take your time sharing the information. You don't have to feel like you're gonna throw everything at them in one big talk. It also gives your kid lots of time to absorb the information and get comfortable talking about these subjects. Again, instead of trying to process, this long, really dense lecture about sexuality all at once. Early sex education can also help kids contextualize and make sense of the things that they're seeing and feeling. For example, I have breasts, which I realize now you can't see, but trust me, they're like right here. When my child was younger, they asked me, what these body parts were. Now, I could have chosen to not tell him, or I could have given him like an alternate name, but he didn't do that because he can see them. Again, they're right here. So I just said, these are breasts. By giving your children explanations for the things that they're seeing and experiencing, you're really helping them to make sense of the world. And they are seeing and hearing things that do have some relation to sexuality. You're helping your children build a vocabulary and develop communication skills that are going to help them as they get older and potentially move into romantic and sexual relationships. One of the things I find most frustrating as an educator who often focuses on consent is that we have this expectation that teenagers and young adults will be able to practice consent in their relationships, that they will have these conversations with their partners about their sexual boundaries and their sexual desires. But if they have spent their entire lives up until then basically being taught that they shouldn't talk about sex, and if they don't have any language to talk about sex, I don't feel like it's fair or realistic to expect that they're suddenly going to be able to do that in an incredibly vulnerable, intense situation like negotiating sex with a partner. Starting sex ed early also gives you as the adult more time to process your feelings, particularly if you start when your kids are super little, because a lot of times they're not going to even be aware that you may be in your feelings about having some of these conversations. Even if you're sitting with your little kid and you're explaining where babies are coming from and you're like, whew, this is a lot, they may not even know that. And by the time they are old enough to be more aware of how you're feeling, you'll have had years of practice, and you may find that you aren't as nervous or you aren't as uncomfortable as you were when you first started. And then starting sex education early and having conversations and finding those teaching moments frequently just means that your kid has an opportunity to grow up with a deeper understanding of sexuality. Now, if you are on board with early sex education, you may be wondering, well, what topics do I cover? Where do I start? Here are some suggestions. You can start with something that a lot of parents and caregivers do anyway, which is teaching your kids the names for like their external body parts, and just include the genitals in there. And you can start off really simple, just, testicles, vulva, penis. You can start with this when your kids are super young, like you can do this when they're babies and you're changing their clothes or giving them a bath. Something else you can start when they're super young is helping them name their emotions. Being able to understand what our emotions are, being able to speak clearly and accurately about them, and being able to communicate our emotions to other people are building blocks for all sorts of things like, strong romantic relationships, sexual consent, respect, all sorts of things that we want to, or we might hope to see in positive relationships when our kids are older. We can start talking to our kids about the fact that there are different kinds of bodies and that there are different kinds of families. We can also talk about how there are different kinds of bodies and that bodies change throughout the course of our lives. My final tip, it's one that I share all the time, is to read books about sexuality that are written for kids. Definitely you can read these with your kids, but you can also read them yourself. And the reason that I recommend this is because reading the books will help you build a child-friendly vocabulary. One of the big struggles that a lot of us have is that if we didn't start really learning about sexuality until we were older or until we were adults, then that means that a lot of the language that was used was geared for the age that we were. So it's more mature, more sophisticated language. And so what winds up happening is that oftentimes we don't realize that there actually are child-friendly ways of having these conversations because nobody ever had them with us. By going to books and by going to source material that is designed for kids, you're gonna learn, how do I say this in a way that like a 2-year-old or a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old will understand? And looking at those books will show you that it is actually possible. I don't expect that most people have a library of sex education books in their house because most people are not sex educators. But even if you want to like pop by the library or even your local bookstore and see what they have available and just kind of read through, then again, you can capture some of that language, which may make it a little bit easier when you're trying to have these conversations at home or in your classroom with your kids. If you have kids or you work with kids, let me know in the comments below how young they were when you started talking to them about sexuality, or if you have even started talking to them about sexuality. And if you don't have kids, let me know in the comments below, how old were you when you remember having your first conversation with an adult about sexuality? That's all for now. I hope you have a great day and I will see you soon. Bye.